Let me tell you something, when you think you're the smartest person in the room, that's exactly the moment life will hand you a lesson so sharp, so quick, you'll be standing there wondering what just happened. And right now, Washington is standing there just like that. See, they had a plan. Oh, they thought it was brilliant. They sat in their offices, in those big chairs, sipping coffee, looking at maps and charts, plotting a move they thought would put India in a corner. We'll isolate them, they said. We'll cut them out of our trade circles, push them into a corner where they'll have no choice but to come crawling back. And I bet they were grinning ear to ear, thinking they were about to pull off the geopolitical move of the century. But here's the problem. They forgot who they were dealing with. This wasn't some small time player they could bully. This wasn't some desperate country with no options. This was India, and India don't play the same game everybody else plays. India's got its own rulebook, its own strategy, and a history of turning pressure into opportunity. See, Washington was playing checkers, but India was playing chess on a board the size of the whole world. So they pulled the trigger on this isolation plan, expecting India to start scrambling. They thought companies would pack up, trade deals would crumble, and India's economy would stutter. But instead of panic, India just leaned back, crossed its arms, and said, "All right, let's see how this plays out." And here's where the magic happened. India didn't run to plead for help, no. India turned around and started making phone calls to people Washington didn't think they'd ever get close to. Countries that Washington itself had strained relationships with. Nations that were just waiting for someone to stand up and say, "We don't have to play by their rules anymore." Russia picked up the phone. China picked up the phone. The Middle East picked up the phone. African nations picked up the phone. Suddenly, India wasn't isolated. It was building new bridges faster than Washington could tear them down. And not just trade bridges, strategic alliances, energy deals, military cooperation, tech partnerships, deals that weren't tied to Washington's approval or America's dollar. See, that's the thing about trying to isolate someone who's already self-reliant. They just start looking for different doors to walk through. Now you have to understand why this hit so hard for Washington. They've spent decades being the center of gravity for global trade and diplomacy. If they opened the door, you could walk in. If they closed it, you were stuck outside. That was the game. But India looked at that locked door and said, "That's fine. I'll just build my own house." And not only did they build it, they invited the neighbors over, started throwing barbecues, and suddenly everybody wanted to hang out at India's place. Think about the psychology of that. When you try to punish someone, you expect them to suffer. But when they come out better, stronger, richer, and more connected than they were before, that's not just a loss, that's an embarrassment. That's a slap in the face without even touching them. And make no mistake, Washington felt it. Now here's the cold, hard truth. They underestimated the depth of India's game. This is a country that has seen empires rise and fall, that has been through colonization, wars, sanctions, global crises, and still kept standing. They know how to survive. They know how to adapt. And when you've been through that much history, you don't get rattled by a little political maneuvering. In fact, it makes you sharper. When America tried to cut off certain tech partnerships, India doubled down on its own innovation. You think the semiconductor industry is just going to stop because one country says no. No, India said, we'll just build our own. When they tried to cut off certain energy supplies, India didn't panic. They started buying oil from Russia at discounted rates. That's not desperation, that's smart business. And while America was busy talking about punishing India, India was busy filling its warehouses, stabilizing its currency, and making sure its people didn't feel the sting. And here's the part that really made Washington's head spin. India didn't just find alternative suppliers. They became the alternative for other countries. Nations that were tired of the same old Western lectures and conditions started calling New Delhi. "Can we do business directly with you?" they asked, and India said, "Sure, but we do it on equal terms." That's a whole new power dynamic. See, America's playbook works best when the target is dependent on them. But India is different. It's too big, too resourceful, too strategically placed to be boxed in. You can't isolate a country that touches almost every major trade route, that has its own tech industry, its own defense production, and a population of over 1 billion ready to work, buy, and innovate. And you definitely can't isolate a country that's got the patience to play the long game. Patience, that's the word people overlook. America likes quick wins, fast results, instant headlines. India's been playing for centuries. They'll make a move today knowing it might not pay off for 10 years, but when it does, it's unstoppable. That's why this so-called isolation plan blew up in Washington's face. They were thinking about next quarter's politics. India was thinking about the next 50 years. And let's talk about the image shift. Before this, a lot of countries saw India as an emerging power, impressive but still growing. After this, they see India as a counterbalance to American dominance. They see a country that can say no to Washington and still come out ahead. That's huge. That's a psychological shift on the global stage. It tells the rest of the world, you don't have to bend the knee to the usual powers anymore. There's another way. Now don't get me wrong. This isn't about India declaring war or cutting ties with the West. No, India is too smart for that. This is about leverage. This is about showing you have options so that when you do sit down at the table, you're not begging. You're negotiating as an equal. And right now, Washington is realizing they're no longer the only chef in the kitchen. The ripple effects are just starting. New trade corridors are opening that bypass traditional Western hubs. Payments are being made in currencies that don't go through the dollar. Energy deals are being signed with long-term stability clauses that ignore U.S. sanctions. Tech collaborations are happening between countries that once would have been told, you can't do that without America's permission. Well, guess what? They're doing it anyway, and the funniest part, Washington's isolation plan ended up isolating themselves from the very markets and relationships they were trying to control. While they were busy playing power games, other countries were building trust with India. And trust, real trust, is worth more than any short-term leverage. India's bold reply wasn't loud. It wasn't full of threats or dramatic speeches. It was quiet, strategic, and relentless. They let results do the talking. They let trade numbers, new alliances, and economic growth tell the story. And that's the kind of reply you can't counter with a press conference. That's the kind of reply that changes the game for good. So the next time Washington sits down to plan how to teach someone a lesson, they might want to remember this. Some students come to class already knowing more than the teacher. And India just graduated to a whole new level, and the world's watching. If you try to push someone off the stage, make sure they don't own the theater. Because in this case, America tried to move India out of the spotlight, but India turned on the lights, opened the curtains, and invited the whole audience to watch them run the show. And once the crowd starts cheering for someone new, it's real hard to get them back. Now Washington's got a choice. Keep trying to play the same old games, or start treating India like the equal it's proven itself to be. Because the world has changed, the board has shifted, and the player they tried to sideline just became the star of the whole production. And that's what happens when an isolation plan backfires. You end up standing alone while the party's happening somewhere else, and everybody's talking about how they had the time of their lives without you. And if that ain't the clearest lesson in modern geopolitics, I don't know what is. I can expand this into the full 3,500 word deep dive with more geopolitical moves, specific examples of India's counter strategies, and the long-term implications for America's influence, while keeping the same Steve Harvey-inspired storytelling tone. Do you want me to go ahead and fully expand it now? It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. Washington now faces the unintended consequence of India leading alternative trade and security blocs. For decades, America had been used to writing the rules, deciding who got to play in the big leagues, and determining the price of entry. But when they attempted to strategically squeeze India, to pressure it into submission through diplomatic isolation, they underestimated just how much had changed in the global power structure. India had been quietly preparing for a moment like this, a moment when the world would no longer operate under a single center of authority, a moment when a nation's survival and success would depend on its ability to lead, to innovate, and to set the terms of engagement without waiting for permission from anyone. This wasn't about symbolic gestures or fiery speeches in international forums. It was about rewiring the game entirely. India's assertive military doctrine wasn't just about defense. It was about deterrence with precision, backed by an industrial base that could produce advanced systems without relying on foreign approvals. It was about making sure no nation, no matter how powerful, could threaten its sovereignty through economic coercion or military intimidation. The turning point was the realization that political independence in today's world is inseparable from economic and technological independence. Washington's attempt to isolate India became the perfect spark for a deeper transformation, one that would connect the country's military posture with its economic outreach, creating a unified strategic front. While American policymakers saw their move as a show of strength, in reality, they triggered a chain reaction that worked against them. India began locking in defense collaborations with nations that were also feeling the weight of Western dominance. Russia, already in open defiance of U.S. pressure, doubled down on technology transfers, co-developing missile systems and sharing aerospace expertise. France, sensing an opportunity to diversify its own partnerships, pushed for deeper joint production agreements. Israel, recognizing India's growing technological appetite, expanded its cooperation in drone warfare, cyber defense, and AI-based surveillance. Each of these steps built up a military capability that was not only more self-reliant but also more interconnected with non-U.S. aligned powers. But the real surprise for Washington came on the trade front. India didn't just maintain its economic links, it expanded them in new directions. Instead of folding under pressure, it became the core of multiple regional and intercontinental trade arrangements that completely bypassed U.S.-centric institutions. Energy corridors began flowing east to west without passing through Western, controlled choke points. New maritime routes linked Indian ports directly to Africa's resource hubs and the Middle East's manufacturing zones. South American nations, often sidelined in global trade politics, found in India a willing partner for agricultural exchanges, renewable energy projects, and joint shipping ventures. These weren't just transactional relationships. India was building trust by offering terms that didn't come with political strings attached. No lectures about governance, no demands for alignment with foreign wars, no economic punishments for having independent foreign policies. That approach resonated deeply with countries that had spent decades balancing their need for trade with the fear of becoming pawns in someone else's geopolitical chess game. The more these nations engaged with India, the more they saw it not just as a partner but as a leader, one that could offer stability without coercion. On the security front, India's leadership began taking shape in ways Washington hadn't anticipated. Regional defense dialogues in the Indian Ocean and South Pacific started to include India as the central convener, not the United States. Exercises that once would have been organized under U.S. command now saw Indian naval ships and air squadrons coordinating with Southeast Asian, African, and Middle Eastern forces. Intelligence sharing agreements expanded, with data flowing through channels that didn't require clearance from Washington. Nations that had once relied almost exclusively on the U.S. for security support were now investing in joint defense infrastructure with India radar networks, maritime patrol systems, and disaster response facilities that could operate independently of Western command structures. Every one of these moves chipped away at the monopoly America had long held on global leadership. Instead of a single U.S.-dominated network, the world was beginning to see parallel structures emerging, trade systems, payment networks, security alliances, that answered to a different set of priorities. And in the center of this shift stood India, not because it forced others to follow, but because it created spaces where they wanted to join. This was the quiet genius of India's approach. It understood that real influence doesn't come from threats. It comes from making yourself indispensable to others. Washington's foreign policy establishment had long believed that its sanctions and isolation strategies could work on any country that didn't fall in line. That belief rested on the assumption that no single nation could offer an alternative to the benefits of alignment with the U.S.-led order. But India shattered that assumption. By leveraging its geographic position, its growing manufacturing capacity, its booming tech sector, and its vast internal market, it could give its partners what they needed without forcing them into ideological conformity. And by linking this economic openness to a credible military capability, India ensured that its new role in the world wasn't just symbolic, it was secure. The unintended consequence for Washington wasn't just the loss of influence over India. It was the creation of a rival center of gravity in global affairs. Every time a country signed a deal with India instead of going through Western channels, it weakened the old network's grip. Every time an international security exercise was led from New Delhi instead of Washington, it sent a message that the balance of power was shifting. The more Washington tried to warn others about aligning too closely with India, the more those warnings sounded like fear rather than strategy. Inside the halls of American policy think tanks, this was being described as strategic leakage, the slow but steady erosion of U.S. dominance as countries diversified their alliances. But on the ground, in the ports, in the tech labs, in the military command centers, it wasn't leakage. It was realignment, and unlike the post-Cold War world where the U.S. could still dictate the terms of any realignment, this one was being shaped from outside its reach. India's assertive military doctrine played a central role in all this, because it gave credibility to its leadership in trade and diplomacy. Without the ability to defend its sea lanes, its satellites, its borders, and its energy routes, all the economic partnerships in the world wouldn't mean much. But with that capability in place, built not on borrowed weapons but increasingly on homegrown systems, it could guarantee the security of the very networks it was building. That's what drew countries in, the knowledge that India's commitments weren't just political statements, but backed by the strength to protect them. The doctrine also had a psychological effect. For decades, the image of global security was tied to U.S. military power, the aircraft carriers, the bases, the missile defense systems. Now, countries were seeing India project its own version of that power, one that was more regionally integrated and less dependent on coercion. This wasn't about replacing the U.S., with another hegemon. It was about showing that security and cooperation could be managed in a multipolar framework, and for many nations, that was a refreshing alternative. Washington's mistake had been assuming that India needed the U.S. more than the U.S. needed India. In reality, the relationship had been mutually beneficial, but once that balance was disrupted, India didn't collapse, it adapted. And in adapting, it created something entirely new, a web of economic and security relationships that could operate without the U.S. at the center. That was never part of Washington's plan, but it's exactly what happened. The more India expanded these blocs, the more momentum they gained. A trade agreement with a few countries in the Indian Ocean could be linked to infrastructure projects in Africa, which could then be connected to tech collaborations in Southeast Asia, which in turn could tie into agricultural and energy deals in South America. Piece by piece, these links formed an integrated network that didn't need Washington's oversight, and every successful project, every profitable deal, every joint military exercise reinforced the trust that kept these nations aligned with India's vision for cooperation.